Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight we are talking about how to avoid making a disaster out of a disaster. I have with me tonight Mel Rubin, and we are going to examine the power you have as a consumer when confronted with local and regional disasters that directly affect you and your family. Our guest, Mel, will address not only what you should know, but also the power you have as a consumer in your community to create a conflict resolution process. Now, that's a process that provides quick relief in order to rebuild your community, while also guaranteeing the due process rights of each individual involved in that disaster. The program will also examine man-made situations such as the recent mortgage foreclosure debacle and insurance and real estate frauds on a large scale, shall we say Detroit? Lastly, we will explore this new frontier as an additional source of work, income, and satisfaction for the dispute resolution professional. So a little bit about Mel Rubin. Mel is an attorney, has been for over 40 years, and continues to serve as an alternative dispute resolution consultant. We will shorten that for ADR. He's also a trainer and practitioner, has been practicing in this field for 28 years. He helped design and organize the Hurricane Andrew Mediation Recovery Program for the state of Florida, and once again after the disastrous 2004 hurricane season. Now, Melvin and his family personally experienced these disasters, living in Florida, of course, and it gives him some special insight in rebuilding communities after incredibly emotional and very traumatic, life-altering events. He assisted in the writing of the state emergency rules, training the mediators, and monitoring the program. He also participated in the creation of the mortgage foreclosure program in Florida, as well as providing ADR services and a variety of other mass claims. Now, Mel has written and lectured extensively for over 13 years on disaster conflict resolution for government officials, insurance industry representatives, and conflict resolution professionals, both nationally and internationally. We have his full bio and information at the TexasConflictCoach.com Blog Talk Radio page. Now, we are taking live callers. If you're listening via computer and you want to call in and have a chat with Mel and myself, you can simply call 347-324-3591, or maybe you're the quiet type and you want to participate in our chat room. We have that open right now, and that's at blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach. We have a guest or two in there now. Feel free to post your comments or questions. And finally, we're all about social media. You can join us in our Twitter chat room, and if you're in Twitter right now, just use the hashtag TCC Radio, T like in Texas, C like in conflict, C like in coach, TCC Radio, and we have Tierra Henry, our student intern, who are engaging people in the Twitter chat regarding our show. So again, you can post comments and questions there as well. So Mel, thank you so much for introducing this topic to us. We've never had this topic on the show, so thank you for joining us.
Hi there, Patty. How are you?
Wonderful. No disasters happening right now, is there? Well, not any hurricane disasters, but yes, doing well, and I'm so glad you're here.
Well, let's talk about it a little bit first, if you don't mind, about how myself and my family experienced it. we've lived in Florida for over 50 years, so hurricanes have always been a part of our life. And what really set me off on this path or journey was Hurricane Andrew came our way, as everybody knows, and we live in an area which is basically an island, Key Biscayne, and we were ordered to evacuate. And we evacuated to my sister-in-law's house, and incredibly, where she was hit much harder than our own home, which we had evacuated. But we could not get back to our home for about almost a week. And when we finally got the go-ahead, Susan and I got in the car and drove back home, which was several miles. And the streets were littered with trees and everything you could imagine. And when we got to the roadway to the island and to the house, we were driving, and sitting right in front of us was a very, very large sailboat that was blocking the entire street. And at that point, Susan just lost it. And to give credibility to her, she's a professional psychologist. And I said, calm down, which really didn't help anything. And she figured at that point the house was gone and everything was gone. And we finally made it home, and there was a lot of devastation, especially in a park area that almost looked like a nuclear had gone off. And when we got to the house, it was interesting because we had about 5 very old mango trees in the backyard, over 40 years old, and they were all blown over. But what was sort of interesting, Patty, was they were all blown over in a way that they fell to protect the house. I mean, it was almost like they fell just to make sure that the house was not damaged. And so we got into the house. We had about 4 or 5 inches of water throughout. But basically, the house was okay. And at that point, we had no electricity, we had no power, we had no water, we had none of that. And there was no process available to quickly recover, not only for us, but for the people who were much more devastated than we were. And at that point, after I had already been in mediation for over a decade, I said, we've got to do something to help the community. And that's really where my voyage and my journey began, in working with mass disasters.
You know, I appreciate you sharing your story, because I'm sure that a lot of the listeners tuning in have something that they can relate to themselves in disasters wherever they might be, whether they're tornadoes or earthquakes or hurricanes. And the thing about it is, it doesn't matter if, you know, you're a professional psychologist, mediator, it's still emotionally wrenching. You know, and it's very stressful, and there's a lot of angst, and there's a lot of loss, even though I love the story about the mango trees, the little blessings that come out of how those mango trees were protecting the home. And, you know, and I've had a number of conversations with, the helping profession, whether they're counselors or mediators, who, when one of these mass disasters that have affected hundreds of people, the first thing we want to do is we empathize, we're sympathetic, we're compassionate, and we want to do something. We want to help. And so what you said to yourself is, how do I bring what I know in my experience in disputes and conflict, you know, to how do I bring this into that? And so you're saying about 10 or so years ago. So what was the path then? I mean, where did you get started, and how did you even think about what you even do? What do you even offer?
Well, there was already a host of mediators that I had trained, and it was obvious that money had to come back into the community before the community started losing its own population. And just as an indication of that, I probably lost between 25 and 30% of my clientele as an attorney and as a mediator, of people who, as you described, were just emotionally traumatized, in saying, I've had it, I'm leaving, I'm getting out. And there was a large number of people who had lived here for a long time who just said that was it, and that happened in New Orleans also after Katrina.
Yes.
And so our interest in it, and my interest, was certainly to help, but it also, in all truth, had a selfish motive in keeping friends and other people locally and not seeing them disappear to other places across the country. So we organized these mediators. At that time, AAA, which is the American Arbitration Association, came in, and we sat down with the major heads of the major insurance companies, the property casualty companies, and said, what are we going to do? And it was really a work in progress. We had to feel our way. But what was interesting was the Department of Insurance and the Insurance Commissioner's Office also came into it from Tallahassee. And through a partnership, both private and governmental, the process of large-scale mediation was born. And now it's everywhere. It's really amazing how something as important and as meaningful has just gone everywhere. And I just saw a statistic based upon what you just said. There is a catastrophe happening every day all over the world.
Wow.
So it's just amazing. So that's
and you broadened it here. You just broadened it because, like I said, it's like, okay, is there a disaster going on in our world today? Well, what's the perspective of your world? And you're saying it's happening every day around the globe, and so we have to think about not just in our small community, but everywhere. And so it must feel really. I don't know what the feeling is for you as far as being able to be part of birthing this large-scale process that really is about helping the consumer and empowering them. I mean, what is that feeling like to birth something like that?
That's a great question. I really have never sat down and thought about it in that context, but I've always found mediation and ADR satisfying, regardless of whether it was connected with a mass disaster or localized to a divorce or anything individual like that. But to do it on a large scale is just, I'll use this term, is a whole new high. It's just, it's just incredible because you're balancing so many interests. You're balancing the interest of the consumer, the homeowner, the policyholder. And on the other hand, you're worried about maintaining a community and maintaining its hope and maintaining everything that goes with it. So it's really a balancing act. And that's very difficult work, but it is rewarding, very rewarding.
And not only maintaining it, but in some cases, I imagine rebuilding it as well.
Right.
Yes,
the rebuilding process is, no, you're right. It's gratifying, and it is a lot of work. It is. Getting that money back into the community, whether it's governmental funding, whether it's insurance policies, that is often starts the rebuilding process.
So let's talk about the power of the consumer. You talked about that. We talked a little bit about our intro, and you talked about it just now, about the power of the consumer that they have to rebuild their communities and to avoid making a disaster out of a disaster. We know that there's people like us in the helping profession who's all about helping, rebuild these communities, but what about the consumer themselves, the one that feels emotionally traumatized, that feels sometimes very hopeless because they did lose everything? So say more about that.
There are two levels probably to answer that question, Patty. The first is the individual, and most of that help they can get by various resources, including governmental agencies, FEMA, and a whole bunch of agencies that at least equip you with basic knowledge, or should equip you with basic knowledge, so that, let's say you're a homeowner and you're presenting an insurance claim. Having all the forms, having all the documents, having estimates in hand, all of that is extremely important to expedite. It isn't always easy. So if anybody's listening who's listening to this and saying to themselves, I did all that and it didn't work, I can understand that. It's a time of tremendous trauma, not only to the individual but to the community. On a community basis, answer to your question, I think people have the power and need to exercise the power to make sure that whatever programs are put in place protect their rights. So what I'm talking about is educational information, whether it's about videos or lectures, because in Hurricane Andrew, the prospective homeowner policyholder would come to the mediation and they would view a video for about 30 minutes to give them some idea of how to prepare, what to present at the mediation, etc. But to exercise that power in making sure that whatever process or program is put into place gives the individual as much equality as what's on the other side, which may be a governmental agency, an insurance company, a bank, or whatever it is. And I think that's what consumers have to be aware of and exercise.
Okay. All right. And, and that can be overwhelming, I imagine, for folks who have, don't know that these programs or resources exist, or sometimes don't even know where to start because, they're referred to so many, whether they're state governmental programs, federal government programs, private people coming in. It can be very overwhelming, I imagine. And then do people then become paralyzed in exercising that power that they have, to doing that. And so when you also talk about, the power of the consumer to rebuild their communities, how does it, without these processes in place, especially like these mass conflict resolution programs, how does a disaster become a disaster? Can you say more about that? And I know we're talking right now about Mother Nature disasters, but there's certainly other types of disasters we'll talk about. But what happens to have a disaster then create another disaster? Give an example.
Well, I think a disaster becomes much worse when, and I'm not trying to trivialize it, is when you say people become paralyzed from the trauma, and that does happen. It happens, in examples where the house is completely gone, and you come to your home where it was, and literally you're in tears, everything's gone. There are usually, and I say usually because I can't account for everywhere, but facilities and resources that are put out by the local government, by the regional government, by the state, as well as by, if you have insurance, by the policy holder and by the insurance company. And again, drawing on Andrew, we made sure that every insurance company sent out a full package to the homeowner as to how to get them involved in the mediation and how to get recovery. Now, what we did, and for those of my brethren who are lawyers, I hope they don't take offense to this, but in the Andrew recovery program, it was just an individual homeowner and an individual adjuster. And while lawyers were not excluded in general, it worked without lawyers for the purpose of getting money into the hands of the homeowners as quickly as possible. And what you would see is we required the insurance company to come with somebody with a check to the mediation. And
wow.
If it was resolved, the check was signed, it was handed over to the homeowner, and the homeowner then moved on to Home Depot or Lowe's, and you could see the rebuilding actually happening within 24 hours of the mediation. And if you ask me, Mel, what gave you the greatest satisfaction, I would have to say it was seeing those people leaving with a check and being able to have hope by really using that money and starting the rebuilding.
Yes, absolutely. They're not stuck in another conflict and trying to rebuild their home.
So,
and sometimes even their family, yeah, definitely.
Right.
Let me just let listeners know that they are tuned in to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program, and I'm speaking with Mel Rubin on the topic of how to avoid making a disaster out of a disaster. Now, we've been talking a lot about Hurricane Andrew, Katrina, some of these natural disasters, but we're also not talking about just that. We're talking about, economic casualties. A couple of years ago or so, where foreclosure seemed to be happening everywhere around the United States, or insurance and real estate programs that have, created a lot of havoc. And of course, we've all been hearing on the news, about Detroit and how, and of course, that's been going on for a while, but even more so with the Detroit, supposedly filing for bankruptcy. And we see the news and the pictures, on television with all the abandoned businesses and homes and dogs and, so how does large-scale conflict resolution programs address these types of disasters for consumers?
The process of designing an ADR system or a conflict resolution system for man-made disasters is not that much different from natural disasters. There is an assessment of who really was hurt, how they were hurt, and how are they to be compensated. And when we were talking before the program about the role of the new technology, over 10 years ago we did a insurance recompense ADR program in which we did it by telephone. And policyholders, life insurance policyholders, would call into the mediation, and the mediation was done over the phone. Mm-hmm. Some mediations, quite a growing number, are now being done online, which is really fascinating. And these man-made situations, whether it's real estate or mortgage foreclosures or bankruptcies, are clearly going more and more into mediation. I'll tell you one quick war story. I was called upon to do a mediation involving over 70 plaintiffs on a real estate fraud case. And physically, we had to rent or use a hotel for everybody because they flew in from all over the country. So there were 70 people who felt they were defrauded, and there were about 10 defendants. But the first mediation I had to do, Patty, was when I walked into the room with the 70 plaintiffs. Most of them were couples, and I had to mediate between the couple who did the investing and the other partner who said, don't do it. And the first mediation was just avoiding divorces by one spouse saying, I told you not to do it, and the other spouse sitting there trying to get as much recovery out of their investment. So these things are very complex, very complicated, and but are I think, the wave of the future.
So with the so what consumers, I think they're becoming more known, as you said earlier, several years ago when you were birthing this whole mass conflict resolution process for quick recovery and really, empowering consumers to mediate, be part of these conversations. They're more probably known now, especially around natural disasters, but with these economic casualties, for example, that we just mentioned, where does even someone go to even ask, is there even a conflict resolution process in place for this? Is there a mediation? I mean, where do they even begin to look to even know if that's even existing for them?
I think what you just said is absolutely true. Because it's becoming such a household word, I don't think you can even pick up a newspaper these days without seeing the word mediation in some context. And as a result, I think the political power base, the economic power base is using it more and more and making it known to the consumer. A lot of credit card companies now are saying you must go to arbitration or mediation before you file a claim for us. Almost all judges these days, Patty, before a case is even set for trial, is going to order mediation. These mediation programs are widely published and publicized. The Detroit bankruptcy, I just saw in a recent article, is using mediation in that bankruptcy. So I don't think, I would hope it is too hard for the consumer to go to the Internet, to, just describe the disaster, whether it's the Colorado floods, whether it's the San Francisco earthquake, whatever, and type in mediation. And I'm almost willing to guarantee that a whole bunch of resources will show up. Barring that, they should always contact either a professional mediator, who lately are very well publicized and advertised, or an attorney. Attorneys are certainly knowledgeable about it as well. But today, it's not too hard to find the resources there.
And so it's one, being educated enough to know to even ask. It's like being aware that even exists. And so, part of our job on the Texas Consulate Coast is educating people. So this is what you're doing for our listeners, is educating people about that, so that they can start doing these things for themselves and asking questions and getting the support and help that they need in these situations. We're going to turn our attention a little bit to the dispute resolution practitioner, but before we do that, is there anything missing from our conversation that you really want listeners, who usually are the consumers listening to the show, that you still want them to know?
Yeah, I think the only additional point before we get to the practitioner is simply this. Even though mediation professionally has been a discipline that's fairly new, maybe the past 20 or 30 years, mediation has been around for millennia. Whether it was the wise sage, or whether it was the grandfather, or it was the Don at the end of the block, we've always had it. And my only comment is, even though I do think it's a profession and a growing profession, the consumer should always look around when there is conflict to see if there is someone available who can provide the guidance and wisdom that hopefully a good mediator gives. We don't have to always go to the professional. I think there's an innate sense of justice and fairness in most people, and they can take advantage of that. So I see conflict resolution is so broad, but we have to be able to use it and know how to use it.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that. So I know you wanted to say a little bit to the dispute resolution practitioners. We do have a number of ADR professionals who listen to our program. And so say more about why you think this topic of large-scale conflict resolution programs are important for them to learn and understand.
Well, one is because it's everywhere, and they're going to be affected by it, whether it's personally, like I was, or through friends, relatives, or whatever. So everybody's going to be affected by it. Number two, if it's as satisfying to them as to me, it's going to be a wonderful experience. And the third thing, talking about it from a more economic standpoint, is I think this is a growing field for the professional in mediation to explore. They can get on various panels, insurance companies, governmental agencies, all solicit these sort of practitioners to assist them in doing the resolution process. So I think, for lack of a better term, there's money to be had there. The question is, where do you get that training? And many of the programs offer in-house trainings. If I can say this without too much prejudice, we have our own disaster mediation training program down here in South Florida through my office, and they can, of course, go to my website. But I think it's there, and I think the more who get involved with it, the more it will grow exponentially, and it'll not only be satisfying personally, but also economically. And the practitioner, if her interest is there, should look around their own community, especially the state. They can contact. Usually every state has some sort of ADR program. Most of them have multiple ADR programs, and see what the requirements are to sign up. Some states have certification requirements, like I know Texas does. Florida does, California, Ohio, etc., and they may have to get certifications in
You mean
general.
as a mediator? You mean as a general mediator or to do disaster?
As a general mediator.
Right. Okay, yes.
Okay,
yes,
and
yes.
the trainings are anywhere from 5 days to 2 days, etc. And then after they finish the basics, probably move on to a higher level, which would be the mass disaster situation. And then the last area of possible economic interest for the practitioner would be the ADR design systems professional. And that's the professional who not only might do the mediations themselves, but she would also help design the program and the process that works for that community. And that's a whole different field, but extraordinarily interesting and worthwhile, because now you're designing a mediation system not just for one person, but for hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. And that's where you really deal with the nitty-gritty, and it's really an amazing job there. And so all of that is stuff that, you know, I've been doing and really just love it. And I really appreciate you having this program and inviting me onto it, because I think it's something that is going to become more and more prevalent and unfortunately more and more relevant with all these disasters, man-made or natural.
Absolutely. And I have a burning hot question, though, for you.
Uh-oh.
Yes. Now, I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and on occasion I do a lot of critical incident stress work. So that's some traumatic event that's happening either in the community, whether that's a natural disaster or a death or casualty at a workplace or things of that nature. And we have done a lot of mass disaster training and, you know, understanding the emotional trauma and all those things that come with disasters. And what I will often hear, because I'm very involved in the dispute resolution communities throughout the United States, as probably you are, especially online. And when I hear about disasters, Hurricane, Katrina being in particular, we had Mediators Beyond Borders who wanted to go out and help the community, but they did it at the appropriate time. They didn't rush in the day after the winds died down and the rain stopped and said, let me mediate your case, because they're already emotionally traumatized. All they can figure out is, how do I just survive today? Food, water, housing, shelter. And what a lot of mediators I've seen in these conversations is that they want to rush in and start conflict resolving right then and there, and we're like, wait, stop. You got to see where they are right now before you start offering those types of services, because what they're really needing right now is, you know, safety, security, shelter, water, you know, those kinds of things. And so that is kind of my belief about that, but you might have a different belief. And so that is my question is, are you saying, or what is your view about that if mediators are listening to this and like, okay, it's everywhere and it's a wonderful experience, and he's saying I should just go right on out and let's start mediating right on the street, you know, we're next to the mango trees, you know. What is your belief or view about that, and what is it you want mediators to know about that? Okay.
First of all, let me say you're a good interviewer. That's a great question.
Good.
A couple of answers. One, I don't promote, the troopers parachuting in ready to mediate. I agree with you totally. And being married to a psychologist, if I said anything different, I'd be killed. But this is first of all, if the mediator is really a professional mediator and a ethical mediator, they would not mediate any case in which they thought that one or both of the parties were either unable to or just could not negotiate. There has to be a parity. There has to be an equality. And if I walked into a mediation and Patty's on one side and blank insurance company is on the other, and you're so traumatized that you say yourself, I can't do this, or it's obvious to me that you can't do this, I ain't going to mediate that case. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. The balancing, though, is when the people come in and they say, I have no home and I need this, this, and this, and those portions of relief are not available, what do you do? And this is really the difficult part for, in part the mediator, but in part the designer of the ADR system. How do you balance the imbalance of power where somebody has a lot of money on one side, whoever it is, and the other side desperately needs that money? And there's an issue, as you raised, of trauma and psychological impact and inability to fully negotiate. What do you do when the person who appears that way and you say to them, listen, Patty, let me just make this recommendation. You're appearing to me to be, really having a difficult time with this, and I understand it, so why don't we put this off for a month or so until you can, gather yourself and feel more comfortable in the negotiation? And Patty turns to me and says, listen, I need the money now. I have 3 kids. I have this. I have that. I understand that I may be taking less than I deserve or that I'm entitled to, but that's my decision.
Mm-hmm.
That's
where that self-determination comes in, right?
That's right, exactly. So, it's a great question, and I think the answer is mediators have to decide that on a case-by-case basis. And we get back to your comment of an educated consumer, and the consumer should not walk into a mediation without fully understanding what their rights are, and whether that means bringing a lawyer or not bringing a lawyer or bringing someone else who can negotiate for them. That's up to them, and that's up to the program and how it's designed. But these are the difficulties, Patty, that I face and every mediator should be facing all the time, whether it's a mass disaster, whether it's a divorce, whether it's a partnership dispute or whatever is, are these people able to negotiate and make a well-informed decision?
Okay, very good. Well, we could have lots of conversation on that, and I appreciate your experience and your expertise and sharing your own personal experience and insights into how this all got started for you. And you mentioned that mediators or dispute resolution practitioners who want to do your disaster mediation training, they can go to, I believe it's mediationtrainings.com, is that right?
Right, mediation trainings with an S, right.
With an S, and are these, is this a 1-day, 2-day, multiple day training?
It's a 1-day, and, with winter approaching, all those folks up north who want to escape the winter weather and come down south and write it off as a business expense, you're welcome to come down here, but the training basically assumes that the enrollee has already taken the basic mediation training, is somewhat of an experienced mediator themselves, and just wants to go to the next level. And they can contact me through that website, through the website of my name, Mel Rubin, or if they go to the Internet, they'll find all the information about me.
Now, do you also teach ADR systems design for mass disaster as well?
No. That is something that, I don't know how to answer that. There are no real trainings like the typical certification for family or civil or anything like that. But you've certainly given me an idea.
Well, and that's true because that doesn't just come out of a hat. I mean, that takes a lot of experience on what are all the elements to really consider in creating an ADR system design, because if you've got, up in Alaska, some community who, a large community that's isolated from the rest of the lower 48, could a mediator, get at least some basic elements of what are all the things that they should consider if they're helping a community design a process. So I see some universities address that in their, PhD or master's level programs, and I've seen a couple of books on ADR systems design, especially in the workplace. But as far as mass disaster, unless FEMA, and I know FEMA, we've had Linda, forgot Linda's last name now. Sorry about that, listeners, but we've done a show from FEMA about their involvement with Hurricane Katrina and some of the internal ADR systems that they have in place there. But yeah, I think it's something to consider. If you're known for doing disaster mediation training, that might be something to put together as well.
That's a great idea, and the only other comment I would make is in the design program, really in many ways the preferential professional would be management people, people who are used to creating systems and that sort of thing. It would not be the typical lawyer, psychologist type thing that we do for family or for civil mediation, because this calls for a real ability to conceive a whole program. So it's a much more broad attraction, I think. But
exactly, more along program management and systems knowledge, really.
Right, exactly.
So absolutely. So Mel, we usually close. You're going to get a chance to give us a final message, but do you have an assignment for the week for our listeners, or maybe a call to action for them?
Well, the thing that I would suggest, which has sort of been a theme for the entire program, is you should know your disaster relief opportunities before the disaster happens. So the call for action that I would give to your listeners would be sometime in the next week or two, or whatever time frame they set for themselves, they should contact their state government or their local government and see what systems are already in place for a disaster happening in their community, where they call, whom they write to, what the Internet provides, and gather together whatever information and documents they need. I mean, as simple as documents concerning the house, filming the house. Now we're talking about physical or natural disasters. In terms of economic disasters, they need to be aware also of what relief either banks, insurance companies, etc., have in place for mediation programs. And generally there is someone knowledgeable who can answer that. So that would be my recommendation.
And that's a really good point to underscore, which is know that ahead of time. Don't wait till the disaster happens and then you're in this crisis mode where you're trying to survive and then trying to figure out all of that. Know that, prepare in advance. And that's part of the power of the consumer is we have things at the tip of our fingers to search the Internet and whatnot. So we're coming to a close. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Oh, my. I wish I could say we should be disaster-free. That would be wonderful. But I don't think that's reality. And I guess the message would be sooner or later all of us are going to be confronted with it, and we should be prepared for it. And that I'm not suggesting that mediation or conflict resolution is the only opportunity or the only solution. But please, please, please be aware of it as an alternative and explore it before resorting to other opportunities of relief.
Okay, very good. Mel, thank you so much for joining us tonight and giving of your experience. You have a good night, and listeners, thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.